I've been seeing a lot of people discussing and debating the Rule of Two and how it's been supposedly changed forever in the new reference book Secrets of the Sith. It's always strange to see what the Star Wars fandom winds up latching onto and blowing up into, frankly, something much larger than it will likely wind up being. But whatever, here are my thoughts on this issue. The big sticking point seems to be that the Rule of Two was maybe created as a pale imitation of the Force Dyad as seen in The Rise of Skywalker. The Dyad is described as this legendary power that would have been the key to unlocking the full potential of the dark side. So Darth Plagueis tried and failed to create that bond with Sidious, then Sidious tried and failed to create that bond with Vader. So people seem to be latching onto that, and some people are upset that it changes what we know about the Rule of Two. But I don't think it does. I mean, earlier in the exact same book, there is a section all about the Rule of Two, and its history matches up with what we've known about it since George Lucas's initial notes on the Doctrine and even the events of the Legends Darth Bane trilogy of books. The Sith were once as numerous as the Jedi, but they couldn't reach their full potential because they were constantly fighting with each other. The Sith were nearly destroyed because of it, but a survivor, Darth Bane, took the Order in a new direction. One master and one apprentice, one to represent the power of the dark side and another to covet it. The master passes on all they know until the apprentice is stronger and can kill the master and take their place. The cycle continues and the Sith grow stronger. There is no mention of the Dyad in that passage, so I don't read this book as Lucasfilm or anyone attempting to change the Rule of Two, the purpose of its creation, or anything else like that, but it is adding more context. The exact line about the Dyad says, "For a millennium, the Sith have adhered to the Rule of Two, but this decree is said to merely be a pale imitation of its predecessor, the Doctrine of the Dyad." So I think the Doctrine of the Dyad is some ancient Force thing, not specifically Sith and not specifically Jedi, just a rare bond in the Force that could happen. Nowhere does it say Darth Bane created the Rule of Two after being inspired by the Dyad. It sounds more like that all came later. Plagueis and Palpatine were like, hey, maybe we can force this bond into existence, which again sounds an awful lot like something they would have attempted in the Legends Darth Plagueis book. They were always trying to manipulate the Force, and they were both pretty much over the Rule of Two. Neither of them had any intentions of passing on their power to the next generation of Sith. They wanted to conquer the galaxy and keep it for all eternity. And by the way, I'm saying all of this as someone who's not really a fan of the Dyad concept. Or rather, I'm not a fan of how it was originally presented in The Rise of Skywalker. The characters all talk about it like the audience should know what a Dyad is. I certainly don't mind the Force evolving. Every Star Wars movie has introduced something new about the Force. But from a story point of view, it felt overly convenient to me. So when I read that passage in the book, my initial reaction was also skeptical. But then I reread the key passages about the Rule of Two and the Dyad, and there's nothing that says Darth Bane created the Rule of Two and modeled it after the Dyad. I think it can be read that way if someone chooses to. I have absolutely seen people that love this idea, and that's great, because we are debating a handful of sentences in a reference book. The Force, and especially this brand new concept, are open to interpretation. What I'm trying to say is, I didn't have to try very hard to find an interpretation I liked, so I find it odd to see people who are choosing to interpret it in a way that angers them. And the fact that this is, again, coming from a few sentences in a reference book makes this whole discussion even less important. The stakes are so low here, because whether you love or hate the possibility of the Rule of Two and the Dyad being connected, reference books are rarely an indication of anything coming up in actual story material. Reference books get retconned fairly frequently. They exist to fill in gaps in the absence of story. If this were all coming from an actual story, I think it would be a different discussion. And even if it did come from a story, I don't see what the problem is. It seems like people just don't want to be reminded of some aspects of some movies they didn't like. But as someone who, again, didn't like the Dyad in The Rise of Skywalker and also had major issues with Episode 9 as a whole, I welcome further exploration of it because doing that usually yields good results. The fandom used to hate on the prequel trilogy constantly. The Clone Wars came out and those people were annoyed that they weren't getting the Star Wars content that they wanted, and they indignantly claimed that Anakin Skywalker never had an apprentice. How dare George Lucas do this? Now the Clone Wars is widely celebrated for providing more context and new appreciation for the prequel trilogy. People who didn't like episodes 1 through 3 understood the era and the story better. Ahsoka, the Padawan that never existed, became a fan favorite character. You don't have to like the sequel trilogy, but to act like this is some new behavior for Star Wars is so off base. New concepts have always been introduced and then are inevitably tied into existing material. George Lucas's original notes for people writing the Star Wars books and comics back in the late 70s make it pretty clear that Luke was not related to Darth Vader or Princess Leia at that point in time. And then The Empire Strikes Back changed that. Star Wars Legends introduced the concept of battle meditation in 1991, 8 years after Return of the Jedi, and then it was retconned into the Battle of Endor. And part of the reason it all fell apart for the Empire is because the Emperor died and took his battle meditation along with him. We saw our first Force Ghost in 1980 and didn't learn that they needed special training to do that until 25 years later, and then we didn't get to see any of that training until 9 years after that. New stories have always and will continue to affect what came before. I don't understand how people are still surprised by this. Again, you don't have to like every concept in Star Wars. There are plenty of things I have rolled my eyes at, but I also recognize it's a choice I have made to read and watch everything, fully knowing it's not all going to be for me. Anyway, to summarize my thoughts, in my opinion, the new book, Secrets of the Sith, does not fundamentally change the rule of two, because I choose to interpret it that way, because I like that more. If you choose to interpret it the other way, as having the rule of two and the dyad connected at a core level, then great. People should interpret it the way they want, because it is open for interpretation. Just don't act like your interpretation is the only one and demand other people agree with you, because at the end of the day, I don't think this discussion will amount to much at all. It's a reference book that a small fraction of Star Wars fans are going to read, and an even smaller fraction have the energy to take to the internet to debate about it. Historically, I don't think a reference book has ever been a good indicator on the future of the franchise. But that's enough from me for today. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and consider checking out our Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.